from Husker 24/7, Michael Bruntz. Bruntsy, how are you this morning?
Not bad. What's going on?
Hey, Bruntsy.
Hey.
Oh, we're just having a good time here, talking a little professional volleyball today, talking a little Jim Harbaugh, just having lots going on for a January.
Yeah, it's what's the slowest sports month do you guys think? Is it May? Is it July?
July. I was going to say July. Yeah.
I don't know. May's pretty slow.
But if you wanted to, and I know you don't, but if you wanted to, you could talk NBA playoffs, you could talk NFL playoffs, you can talk baseball.
You can do that in June.
Not in July. We said July.
Yeah,
June.
I said May. I said May is pretty slow.
Yeah, and I said July was slower because you don't have NBA, you don't have NHL. College World Series is done here. You're not quite to NFL football camp. July is the desert of sports talk radio.
I love baseball. I'm good, man.
Do you remember like the 3 back when Sports Center actually showed highlights and stuff? That way back in the day.
Is that the new when MTV used to show music videos when ESPN
Basically,
used to show highlights?
they're kind of like arm in arm, I think. But do you remember the 3 days around the All-Star break? It would just be there was nothing on ESPN those 3 days. It was the worst. You'd wake up in the morning and there's just nothing. I always hated that as a kid.
Lots of home run derby coverage, lots of softball game coverage.
Softball game.
Bill Nye the Science Guy legging out a double.
Don't forget about media days. I mean, that's it. Yeah, baseball and media days.
Do people watch those media days?
In July, we have to. There's nothing else going on. Bruntsy, speaking of baseball real quick, tomorrow, college baseball practice gets started. How pumped are you?
Very. I'm excited. That means spring's around the corner. It's like a sign of spring, right? It's UPS guys breaking out the shorts. It's the snap of the glove. Everybody's tomorrow's a great day. Everybody's 0-0. Everybody's healthy, feeling good. So it's I'm excited.
Now, Bruntz, stay there with baseball before we jump into football because, Husker Athletics has seen a strong uptick in talent lately. Football gets Dylan Raiola. Softball gets Jordy Ball. Volleyball always recruits high-level athletes and transfers. Women's basketball gets Britt Prince. In order to be playing in Omaha someday again, how do you feel about Coach Bolt's team right now heading into spring? And who are we possibly sleeping on if there are any of those giant, I don't even want to just call them recruits or transfers that are either in the program today or being brought in?
Well, I mean, if you're just going off of rankings and, who was kind of pursuing players, Drew Christo. I mean, he's that kind of guy. He was a top 150 recruit, I think, out of Elkhorn, and I think he's going to be an early storyline for this team. I mean, I think he came in with a lot of because of that ranking, a lot of expectation that he hasn't lived up to through 2 seasons, and Nebraska has to find starting pitching options on Friday and Saturday nights, and I think he's going to get the shot to do it. I mean, he's a big physical pitcher, throws mid-90s and, has developed a pretty nice breaking pitch to go with it. So I would probably go there in terms of just guys that, that are kind of that name that people should know. This team, I think, is going to be a little bit more, maybe not lacking star power isn't the right word, but I think they're going to be a lot more balanced than what they've been in the past. I mean, you had 2 guys last year that in Max Anderson and Bryce Matthews that I would put among the people that you just mentioned, Andrew. But I think kind of out of the gates, the 2 that I would say are Drew Christo and then Dylan Carey, who was the top player in Colorado out of high school, and I think has the potential to be a breakout star this year for Nebraska.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz, Husker 24/7. Bruntz, before we move on from baseball, what do you think is realistic for Nebraska, both in terms of talent acquisition and expectations for the program in the Big Ten, and how much, if at all, does that change with the addition of the 4 West Coast teams next year?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see how that works out. I mean, I think I think they have to. I think the conference has to be smart about how they bring those 4 teams in, and I think there's an opportunity to kind of raise the profile of the conference. I mean, I know that the new Big Ten commissioner Tony Petitti's been more involved with Big Ten baseball meetings than any of his predecessors. He's a former Major League Baseball executive, so he actually understands the sport. I think that helps. And I think there's an opportunity if the Big Ten wants to do it to expand the number of teams that you put in the tournament, in the conference tournament. I think you can get creative with scheduling earlier in the year to kind of take advantage of the fact that you have 2 teams in Southern California. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And UCLA has been good for a long time. USC's getting better. They've been kind of the Nebraska football almost of college baseball the last 20 years. And Oregon and Washington are consistently good too. So I think it's kind of an arrow up situation for Big Ten baseball. And I think, since Nebraska's been in the Big Ten, I think Nebraska kind of helped push forward a lot of the kind of growth in the conference that they've had so far. And I think there's another opportunity to take that next step with these 4 teams coming in.
Bruntz, Nebraska signed 29 high school players in December and added 6 transfers out of the transfer portal. There's ones we know a lot about and a good amount we don't. Let's lean toward the good amount we don't here. Who's one Nebraska fans should know more about in terms of making the earliest impact at their position, or maybe it's the importance of early development for that player? Who's a player that we just don't know enough about that fits that criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've kind of been paying attention, but not a guy that's kind of flown under the radar a little bit is Ja'Cory Barney. Unfortunately, was the kid that went viral for falling on the ice
and dropped his smoothie.
I felt bad, that I've done that. I mean, I did it yesterday. I mean, it happens to everybody. I mean, dude, it happens.
It's a rite of passage.
My back still hurts.
So I think he's somebody that people need to kind of keep in mind. I mean, I think when you kind of look at positions where Nebraska is going to be looking really hard at younger guys to kind of come in and play, wide receiver is one of them. I mean, it's a tough position to learn if you're not on campus early. I think that Ja'Cory Barney probably gets overlooked a little bit because he kind of had a no drama recruitment, which Nebraska beats out Miami, his hometown school, for him. He never wavers. He plays quarterback, running back, wide receiver for his high school team the last 2 years. And I think he's a guy that Nebraska staff really feels like they got a steal there out of South Florida. So I think he's a guy to know. Kind of, when guys commit late in the process too, I'll give you one on defense. Vincent Shavers, another Florida kid, goes up to the last weekend of the recruiting process, committed to Miami, visits Nebraska, flips to Nebraska, wins defensive MVP in an all-star game down in Miami of basically the top players in the region. And if you watch his highlights, he just kind of has that extra gear when he's rushing the quarterback that it kind of makes you take notice. And I think what we saw last year with Nebraska is that Matt Rule and his staff are willing to take advantage of somebody's tools. Like if a guy can get after the quarterback, James Williams is a good example of this, who comes from nowhere on the scout team, and all of a sudden he's in there on third downs getting after the quarterback. I'm not saying that Vincent Shavers is going to do that, but he has the kind of skills, and with being on campus early, to put on some weight, to go through strength and conditioning and all that stuff that everybody else does. But he's one that I'm at least intrigued to see a little bit more on the field, just because the way his recruitment happened, it was really late. He basically visited and committed within a span of about 72 hours and then signed. So he's somebody that has my attention as well.
We're talking with Michael Bruntz of Husker 24/7. So looking at the early enrollees, obviously quarterback gets all the attention for the early enrollees, and for good reason. Both of Nebraska's freshman quarterbacks our early enrollees. You mentioned some of the challenges at wide receiver. You mentioned Vincent Shavers maybe being able to put some weight on. We haven't really talked about the offensive linemen enrolling early yet. Outside of that quarterback room, where do you think it will most benefit some of the guys coming in early? Is it guys like on the lines where they need to physically mature, or maybe places like wide receiver or defensive back where they maybe need to get their mind right for the college level?
Well, I mean, I generally look at linemen coming in, especially offensive linemen, like you get such a huge benefit from going through that first winter conditioning and kind of getting that process started of adding weight, reshaping your body, that kind of stuff. I mean, that's so huge for those guys to kind of have that extra time. Grant Bricks enrolling early. I mean, that was a decision that he was really kind of wrestling back and forth with. And, he's a developmental prospect with a really high ceiling, and you're going to get the opportunity to go through the strength and conditioning program this winter, get adjusted to just going against, having to block Nash Hutmacher and having to block Ty Robinson. I mean, you're not at Logan Magnolia there anymore, having to deal with those guys. So there's a lot of benefit for him and Gibson Pyle and those guys coming in early. I think, I'm eager to see what the 2 deep looks like once we get to like August on that offensive line, because, last year you had Gunnar Gatula on there as a true freshman at one of the tackle spots. You had Sam Sledge working his way at one of the guard spots. I don't know if it's going to skew that young this year. But I guess back to your original question, I just think there's a little bit more benefit to linemen to kind of get that process started and kind of start developing. And, I think when you talk about corners, I mean, that's maybe one that we're not talking about enough with Buford and Larry Tarver coming in, but they kind of have the same thing. I mean, you're a cornerback in high school. You're kind of the top dog. You're used to going against, wide receivers that are about your size and that thing. And then, all of a sudden you're having to line up across from, like an Isaiah Nair, who's every bit of 6'3", 6'4", 210 pounds and is like 5 years older than you. I mean, there's an adjustment to make there too. So I think guys, you can say whatever you want about guys finishing out their senior year and having that experience and blah, blah, blah. But if you want to kind of get that process started, I mean, that first semester is huge. And you look at the guys that play as true freshmen this year for Nebraska, a lot of those guys were here in the spring and going through things early.
Bruntz, do you think a guy like Grant Bricks, who obviously with his caliber of recruit, a lot of times we think, okay, those are maybe guys that could get on the field early, but as you mentioned, he's also kind of a developmental prospect, even with that high star rating. Do you think he's maybe a redshirt candidate for this year? Maybe they try and get him in the 4 games, but they'd like to preserve that extra year of eligibility for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the idea, is that he'll redshirt and kind of use this year to grow. Like I said earlier, I mean, I think the picture is a little bit more crowded at offensive line, along the offensive line, than what it was last year. I mean, I was trying to think back the other day. They were almost down to like 10 or 12 scholarship linemen last year, this time, just because of injuries and everything else. And, this year you've got a lot of 6-year guys coming back. You bring in Micah Mazuka at one of the guard spots. I mean, I think it's probably trending to where Grant Bricks, is maybe not needed in some ways, unless he kind of comes out and just kind of blows the doors off everybody. But, I think a lot of times with high school linemen making the transition to college football, there's a learning curve that kind of comes with pass blocking. And I think that's the case with Bricks, just based on the style of offense he ran in high school. And, that's the benefit of having 15 more practices in the spring to learn that stuff. But, I know at least with Bricks, just a tremendously high ceiling. And, a guy that's been good at everything he's ever done his whole life. I mean, he's a really dialed in kid. Schaefer went out to one of his high school games, and during halftime he's a drum major leading the band. So He's definitely used to succeeding, but I think it's probably more a situation where, he's just learning, a little bit further down on the depth chart.
Bruntz, we know Coach Rule is a standard setter. How have you seen weekends like the last and the one upcoming become an example of the new standard under Coach Rule? Like, how have you seen things change under his leadership from either the ones that came before and even from his evolution from year one to year two?
In terms of recruiting?
Yeah, in terms of recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've seen is, you're seeing the staff kind of catch up a little bit. I mean, I think what maybe gets lost, with the recruiting conversation and as it kind of relates to new staffs, you get hired and you just have like a dead sprint to the finish line that first class. So that to me was the 23 class, and everybody assumes, okay, well, new class, you're caught up, you're ready to kind of hit the ground running. And I still think, in that second class, just with the way that a lot of recruitments are nowadays, you're still kind of playing catch up. You're trying to evaluate, figure out where you are, where you need to go, like in your region, recruiting wise, that kind of stuff. Figure out what you have on your roster and what works and what doesn't. And they had a great class in 24. But I still think, that you're kind of like honing what you know. And I think you're seeing in the 25 and even the 26 class, a much better idea of what they're looking for, a better, stronger relationships with recruits earlier in their recruitment, which I think matters. And, I think the blueprint though for them, and you've seen it this last couple of weekends with who they've offered and who they've brought on campus, it's going to start, in this region. It's going to start locally. A lot of, talented local kids were on campus this past week, and they're going to have more this coming week as well. And they're going to build with that, and then they're going to bring in skill guys and still, from Texas and Florida and different places. And I think, the message that they're giving to recruits is that, the foundation's been set, and now they're kind of ready to, take that next step as a program. We'll see if that happens, but that's the message they're sending. And from talking to recruits this past weekend, I think it was pretty well received.
Bruntz, are you surprised at all? Maybe surprised isn't the right word, but has there been any sort of attention that you've paid to how far ahead this staff is working? I mean, I think I saw an offer go out to a 2027 class quarterback. Is that right?
Yeah, that was the fourth that they've put out to a 2027 quarterback.
Is that, in your experience, at least covering Nebraska recruiting, like, is that unusual to be working that far ahead? It didn't seem like previous staffs were maybe quite as forward thinking as this staff is.
Yeah, I think at the quarterback spot, you kind of have to. And I think, Frost's staff, I think, did an okay job of that, where you threw out some early offers, kind of see what the kind of like no doubt type guys, the ones that, in 2 years, are going to be, top prospects. You see what you can kind of get out of that. And then, I think the one thing that this staff has done that I've taken notice of, and I hope others have, is they've been really aggressive with making early in-state offers. I mean, the 26 class, the 27 class, they've got offers out. And I think you have to do that now. I mean, going back to what I said, I mean, if you're going to build around, if you're going to kind of build your recruiting classes on local talent and regional talent, you're going to have to make those offers early and build relationships, because you have to recruit local kids like they're in Colorado or they're in Florida. I mean, you can't take any of that for granted. So I think they've been pretty forward thinking in that way. And I think it's been well received. I mean, I think, when you get an early offer from Nebraska and you're, a local kid, I mean, I think that's a big deal. So yeah, I mean, the quarterback stuff, that's just kind of the time frame they're on. I think a little bit more now, but I think they've done a nice job of kind of knowing who's around locally and within a couple hours here, and not being shy about just starting those relationships. And I think that's the right approach with the way recruiting is nowadays.
Bruntz, just a couple of minutes left here. You got my wheels turning a little bit with talking about how they've recruited local kids Obviously, a guy like Christian Jones is a big priority for next year's class. They've already got several commits locally for next year's class as well. But an offer that went out, not early, I wouldn't say, but kind of about in the time frame you would expect, is Pierce Newberry from Millard North. How are they prioritizing him? A guy that physically, at least, might profile similarly to Christian Jones, but's had a very different high school career so far.
Yeah, no, he'd had the Iowa State offer for a long time. But, his dad's a former Nebraska player. The program obviously means a lot to that family. And Newberry is an interesting case. I mean, you watch him on the field. I mean, he's a really rangy kid. I want to say he was probably more of a safety rover type.
Yeah.
But you can see where, you add 30 pounds to that frame pretty easily and take advantage of that athleticism. And you got something working there. So, I think they're in a good spot for him. I think that kind of run of offers that they made, I want to say it was in early January. I think those are all guys, Jackson Carpenter at Lincoln Southwest and Ryman Zieber at the tight end down in Platteview. I think those are guys that they're in a good spot for. And you just kind of, with Newberry specifically, Nebraska didn't buy there a ton. Obviously because of Vermoss being committed and, evaluating there. But I mean, I think both of those guys are really nice prospects that you could build a class around. And, it was kind of with Newberry, you're kind of like waiting for that offer. And I think it's a good one. I think they beat some other schools in there too. So we'll see how that plays out.
Well, he's certainly from a good place, right, Bruntz? I mean,
he is. Good stock come out of Illinois.
Can't go wrong there. That's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. We appreciate it as always, Bruntz.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Bruntz.
That's our guy, Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Coming up next, we've got some Hurrdat hot seat to get to here on a Thursday.
Maybe I'll ask you what your favorite cereal is.
Ooh, I did love some cereal back in the day. We've got Hurrdat hot seat coming up next on Hurrdat Sports Radio.